Afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Mueller. I'm the President and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. Thank you all for being here today in this wonderfully packed room for this fantastic program. Today marks another exciting year in partnership with Richard and his Edelman team, as well as the 20th annual edition of the Trust Barometer, the largest global survey and the foremost authority on trust in business, government, media, and non-governmental organizations. It was just launched at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, and you all are among the first to hear the details of this report. With technological advances and political unrest on the rise, today's discussion will shed light on all of our expectations for the coming year. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our head table guests, many of whom sit on our board of directors. Please hold your applause until all of our guests have been introduced. So first, David Snyder, the Chief Operating Officer of Chicago Cred and our moderator for today's discussion. Michael Flannery, Chief Executive Officer, Duchossois Capital Management and Director, Executives Club of Chicago. Heather Higginbottom, President, JP Morgan Chase Policy Center. Wayne Bush, President, Financial Services, NTT Data and Director, Executives Club of Chicago. Tanise Paul, Chairman, Energy BBDO and Board Chair, Executives Club of Chicago. Richard Edelman, Chief Executive Officer, Edelman and Director, Executives Club of Chicago. Jean-Pierre Comte, President, Barilla Americas. Alex Bell, Global Client Director, Professional Services, LinkedIn. Teresa Wilton Harmon, Chicago Office Managing Partner, Sidley Austin and Director, Executives Club of Chicago. Sandra Cordova-Misik, President and CEO, WTTW and WFMT. Dan Ryan, President, Central Region, JLL, and Director, Executives Club of Chicago. Claudia Edelman, Founder, We All Human Foundation. Tom Gallagher, Chief Executive Officer, Dairy Management, Inc. Kevin Cook, President, Chicago Office, Edelman. Scott Swanson, President, Illinois PNC Bank and Second Vice Chair, Executives Club of Chicago. John Edelson, Chief Executive Officer, William Blair, and Director, Executives Club of Chicago. Dr. Tony Irving, former Executive Director, Get In Chicago. And James Kolar, Central Market Managing Partner, PwC, and Director, Executives Club of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming all of our guests. Thank you for being here today and for your support. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank our very generous sponsors, without whom we would not be able to bring you this kind of programming today. So first, our platinum sponsor, BMO, our gold sponsors, LinkedIn, Northern Trust, and OCC, our silver sponsors, American Airlines, Antares Capital, Ingredion, OptumRx, PNC Bank, and University of Phoenix, our technical sponsor, Shure, and our media sponsors, the Chicago Latino Network, the Wall Street Journal, and WBEZ. Thank you to all of you for making this program possible. And I'd also like to thank our committed members. Many of you are here today, and we also have many esteemed guests in this room. Thank you all for joining us. Please enjoy your lunch, and we'll be back in a little bit to kick off our program. Thank you.
My name is Kevin Cook. I'm the president of Edelman's Chicago office. And I just want to start out by saying that this annual trust event with the Executives Club is literally tantamount to the Super Bowl when it comes to Richard, and I know he's chomping on the bit to get up here and begin the presentation, so I will be brief. And the Oscars and the Tonys, Richard, right? In 1999, no less than 40,000 people stormed the WTO in Seattle, and the media very quickly tabbed it, the battle in Seattle. And among the most notable participants at that time were national and international NGOs. And Richard, intently watching all of this unfold, wanted to learn more about these NGOs and their impact on business and civil society. And that was the first step that set the course for the firm's ubiquitous Trust Barometer. In the years to follow, we added business and government and media to the mix to round out the four major institutions that underpin the study's focus. And it's grown in depth and dimension over time. Over the last 20 years, we've seen several milestones. The fall of the celebrity CEO in 2002, the rise of a person like me in social media in 2006, the crisis in business after the Great Recession, the fall of government in 2012, and the trust in crisis and the rise of populism following the election in 2016 and 17. The study's results are released in Davos every year, and if you ask Richard, he will say that this year it was the talk of the town, which I half joke about and half not, because it was populating the majority of the conversations that were taking place in breakout sessions. So, to tell us about this year's study, The Great Trust Paradox, please join me in welcoming Richard Edelman.
And I am Patrick Mahomes. No, just a joke. I wish it was Mitch Trubisky. That's another local joke. So we've been doing this for 20 years, and I want to put some perspective for you. The first 10 years, 2000 to 2010, globalization became the first wave of the tsunami, weakening trust in institutions. The second really happened with the Iraq War, when people went, well, wait a minute, we went to war about uranium in Niger, and that wasn't exactly true. And then the rise of India and China, very profound, 1 billion people out of poverty, and significantly changing the trust dynamic such that the happy part of the world became Asia, and especially the fast rising, now can't call them developing markets, but they were in those days. Then the rise of social platforms, such that trust moved from being top-down to horizontal, peer-to-peer. Then came 2008, the last big wave of the tsunami. And that one really smashed the idea that establishment companies, General Motors, Citigroup, all that, which underpinned the economy, were in fact well-managed, well-run, not so. Didn't happen. Government had to bail people out. So what happened in the next 10 years, though, was the ripple effect of those 5 waves of the tsunami. So ripple effect number 1 was the mass-class divide. It took about 6 years after the Great Recession for people to wake up and go, it's not going back to the way it was. Wait a minute, too much of the money's going to the elites, and my government paid for bailing those guys out. That's not fair. And that's led to Trump, it's led to Boris Johnson, it's led to lots of other sub-effects. Next, we saw the decline of government, and that's partly linked to the mass-class divide, to be clear, the sense that government was participant in this unfairness. But it also had to do with the idea that government couldn't get stuff done. So it actually was the impasse over the Greek debt for European countries, followed by the impasse in Washington between Obama and the Republicans on budget, and then the scandals in developing markets, South Africa, Mexico, Brazil, Odebrecht, et cetera. So then in that next period, you started to see the recovery of business, because business started to wake up to the idea that, in fact, maybe we need to do more than make money. We need to serve stakeholders. And that really started around 2015. Others had identified sustainability as important, but it started to go into the core of business operations. It wasn't CSR, it was change my business. Then there came the battle for truth. Social platforms were no longer actually believable, even though 40% of people rely on them for trustworthy information. So that is the state of affairs as we go into 2020, and Patrick Mahomes gets behind center. Here we are. So what I want to describe to you today is a great trust paradox. You should think with the rising economy that you would have a rising trust level. Not true. And that is a paradox. It has historically been so, that, in fact, rising GNP yields rising trust. That is still true in Asia. It is true, actually, in the developing markets in general. But there's a delinking for developed markets between trust and GNP growth. We are at a flat line in trust in developed markets because fear has eclipsed hope. And I'm going to give you the dimension of that level of fear as we go into the presentation. So first, let me describe for you the extent of the mass-class divide. Every year, we go out into the markets, 28 markets this year, 33,000 people. We talk to people who are college-plus educated, have 75K plus income, are media attentive, and then everybody else. So 15% and 85% of the 33,000 people we speak to. And we talk to them in October and November, so this data is pretty fresh. What you will observe in those numbers, if you can read them, and this is your test, is that, in fact, about half the countries in the general population are in distrust. 2/3 of the countries in the elite population are in trust. It is Alice in Wonderland, folks. You see the same facts and you see completely different outcomes. And when this happens, you get electoral unrest. So what's gone on is from the US, UK, France, that was the beginning of it about 4 years ago. And you have Brexit and Macron and Trump. You now see this metastasizing. It is going into Canada, Germany, India, China. So happy places, ostensibly. But I'm telling you that Mr. Modi's problems in India are partly a function of a loss of trust in his government and the lack of belief that, in fact, there will be an equal outcome. So think about the fact that it's a record number of countries with the double-digit inequality between mass and class in terms of attitude. So, point one. Point two, I want you to understand what's going on in our country. It's not just a mass class, it is a Republican Democrat. Republicans have a very strong belief in business. Democrats, not. Republicans have a terribly low view of media. For Democrats, it's the last retaining wall of trust in our society. The highest trust institution for Democrats is media. The lowest trust is government. Republicans and Democrats share one thing: they don't like government. Maybe for different reasons, but they both don't like government. Democrats used to like government, Republicans never liked government. So, again, Alice in Wonderland for Republicans and Democrats. Now, I want then to explain to you the severity of the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, more than half the people we surveyed across all the countries say that capitalism is actually causing more harm than good. We've never seen this. And more than 2/3 of the people tell us the system does not work. It doesn't work because it's unfair. And we're tired of it. We want change. And we're prepared to take that change in our own hands, whether it's employee walkouts, whether it's Greta Thunberg, whether it's online protest. We want change. And why do they want change? They want change because they're scared. They're scared of downward economic mobility and social mobility. In every developed country that we studied this year, every developed country, more than half the people believe that their incomes will be lower 5 years from now than they are today. That is a shocking vote of no confidence at a time of record economic prosperity. What's behind this? What's behind the fact that in 2/3 of the countries, the majority of the people believe that their social position will be diminished in the next decade. Why are we so scared? Here it is. It's to do with job loss. More than 80% of people said, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job to gig economy, automation, outsourcing, immigrants, whatever. 80% of people go to work every day thinking this may be my last job, my last day at my job at Marshall Field's, because Macy's may just close the store. So when you have that level of fear, it has a knock-on effect on the industries that cause it, namely tech. To explain, tech has always been the highest trust industry of any that we look at. This year, for the first time in 1/3 of the countries, tech is no longer the most trusted industry. Tech has lost its position, partly because of the risk of job loss, partly because of privacy, and partly because of actions by certain social platforms, or inactions by certain social platforms is a better way to state it. So, what I want to express to you is also the vote of no confidence in leadership. Traditional leaders in a world of power elites, which is what many of us understood, has been flipped on its head. 2/3 of people don't believe in government leaders, and in particular, they don't believe in the wealthy. There's a really interesting paradox of a country run by a billionaire, and yet the wealthy are deeply suspicious. So, what I want to unveil for you today is a reconsideration of how to look at trust. Trust, historically, in our questionnaire has been trust to do the right thing. But I want to unpack that. Trust to do the right thing. The to do is about competence. The right thing is about ethical behavior. What's happened in this year's data is that the competence fact is important but not sufficient. Competence is what we measure as business. It's not good enough because ethical behavior is actually what you're being graded on. And we're not grading our executives that way. We have to change how we do what we do. Specifically, let me explain that business is seen as deeply competent. It's the only one of the 4 institutions, business, NGO, government, and media, that is seen as competent. Government has the lovely benefit of being both incompetent and unethical. For you media in the room, you're in the same boat. Nervous laughter. For NGOs, take a bow. You're ethical. You're deeply incompetent. So you're seeing the report card, and it's not so pretty. There's hope. Can explain. But what I really want you to appreciate is why and how business can get forward. We need to appreciate that the component parts of trust are ability, dependability, integrity, and purpose. We used to be graded heavily on competence, and now we're being graded differently. And it's about integrity, 1, purpose, and dependability. And why do these things matter? Because we've had Deutsche Bank, and we've had Carlos Ghosn, and we've had, lots of other examples of companies falling short. We have to do better. Take a look at the one that has the biggest place in the chart. It's integrity. The I word, not the C word. It's integrity. Do we do what we say we're going to do? And are we honest about it? It's a stakeholder world, ladies and gentlemen. It is not a shareholder world. For all of you who run money, Principal Group and others, I'm sure your ESG investing, Larry Fink's proclamation a few weeks ago, all of this is indicating a different way of doing your business. You will make money because companies focus on stakeholders, not just on making money in the short term. That's the expectation of society. It's not going to work if we're just quarterly focused. Also, I want you to appreciate the new role of chief executives. If there's one slide I want you to take home today in your head, this is the one. 92% of people told us, I want CEOs to speak up on issues of the day. It's not just about the numbers. It's about sustainability. It's about diversity and inclusion. It's about gun control. It's about what matters to your people. That's the key point. And your people are your consumers and your employees. Also, 3/4 tell us, CEOs, do not wait for government. Do not wait. If government is disabled, you have to step into the void. Act. Act on things to do with supply chain. Act on diversity. Don't wait for legislation. 3/4 are begging you to lead. Do it. Look, it's also deeply important that you appreciate how your employees are looking for leadership. The number one thing in a full employment economy that you should put in your head is, I work for a company because I make money, but I want value and values. I'm not going to stay with you if I don't feel that Barilla, for instance, is going to lead in making its supply chain more sustainable or helping somehow in getting more people of color into the company. I want to feel that I'm changing the world. Otherwise, I'll go to work for a startup. I can do that. Lead because your people demand it. But also, lead because your consumers demand it. All of you who are selling brands, whether you're in financial services, whether you're in CPG, or whether you're in healthcare, appreciate the world has changed. We are in a world of belief-driven buying. I exercise brand democracy every day when I buy my products. I buy a Mondelez product because I believe in the company, I believe in the brand. And the brand has to make change, and the brand has to speak for me and stand up for me, and not just be the product quality. That's nice, that's a given. Do that which your consumers expect you to do, and government isn't doing. It's a time for brands to spend their money in such a way, Dove with the Crown Act and acting for kids who show to school with cornrows or whatever else. So what? That's what people want. They want you to stand up for them. Do it. Also, I want you to appreciate the progress that's been made in 1 year. In 1 year, we have the Business Roundtable standing up with 185 companies signing on to a proclamation, stakeholder, not shareholder. You also have in France a group called Business for Inclusive Growth, led by Danone and other companies, where they commit to fair wages, retraining, and a sustainable supply chain. We also have the Larry Fink move of a few weeks ago, where he specifically said sustainability moves to the top of the charts of our investment priorities. And then lastly, we must be careful and do retraining. We must commit to those 40% of American workers who are going to be changed in their jobs. Think about you're a truck driver. Huge demand for truck drivers right now. What's going to happen in 6 years when there's autonomous vehicles? They're all going to be out, and companies are going to go, no, that's not going to work. We have to retrain these people, upskill these people, use these 6 years so that they feel as if they're part of the system. So I want to tell you that I believe that it is possible for every institution on our cross chart to improve. And there are specifics that are actually going to yield that kind of improvement. For business, let me start out by saying it's to do with retraining, fair pay, and understanding that their job is stakeholder, not shareholder. For government, it is go local, be willing to partner with other NGOs or business, and cut the ridiculousness of left-right. For media, it is separate opinion and fact. Don't sell more papers or get more clicks because you're more divisive. Just give us the information and let us decide. Similarly, for NGOs, transparency on funding and being willing to partner and not just throw stones at glass houses. People are basically saying, get the job done, improve our world, make it fair, make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I know that I speak for everyone in the room when I say it is such a privilege to hear these insights from you directly, and you're taking the time to be here with all of us. So today's panelists include stakeholders from some of the most prominent American businesses who are working to integrate the crucial insights that are gleaned from the Edelman Trust Barometer. So first, we have Jean-Pierre Comte, president of Barilla Americas. He joined, sure, yeah. JP joined Barilla in 2010, beginning his tenure as vice president in charge of Western Europe. With over 25 years, his passion for consumers, customers, and employees is seen in all facets of his work and his philanthropy. Thank you for being here. Heather Higginbottom is president of the JP Morgan Chase Policy Center. The center focuses on development and advances of sustainable, evidence-based policy solutions with the goal of driving inclusive economic growth throughout the United States and the world. Heather's experience in the nonprofit sector as well as in government enables her to speak to all three sectors with intrinsic firsthand knowledge. And moderating today's panel is David Snyder, who needs no introduction to many of you in the room. After spending more than 3 decades in various roles, most recently as publisher at Crain's Chicago Business, the nation's leading local business newspaper and website, David now serves as Chief Operating Officer of Chicago Cred, a pioneering initiative targeting gang-affiliated men most at risk for being perpetrators or victims of gun violence. So I'd like to remind you that you can text questions to David during the discussion. It's up there. It's on your program. You just type exec, E-X-E-C, to 22333, and hopefully he'll be able to get to them. We seem to always run out of time, but he'll do his best. And now please join me in welcoming JP, Heather, and David, and Richard.
First of all, I want to thank Margaret and the Executives Club and Edelman for welcoming me to be part of the program today. It's a true pleasure. And thanks to all of you for coming out to hear today's program. Richard, I'm going to start with you. As Margaret mentioned earlier, and Kevin as well, this is the 20th year of the Edelman Trust Barometer. I went to the Wayback Machine and actually found the first one that was published in January of 2001. To put that time in context, the S&P 500 was at an all-time high. We had just come out of a very contentious presidential election, and there were early signs that the U.S. economy may be shrinking. Sounds a little bit familiar. When I look at the report, even then there was a fairly low trust level for business and the media, and even government. Has anything changed over the last 20 years? And if so, what are the biggest swings you've seen?
So if you look at the 4 institutions, NGOs started high, went higher, and have ebbed a bit. And they went higher because of the rise in developing markets. Media started in the middle and is like an airplane running out of fuel. It goes for a while and then it starts to, and that's a lot to do with social platforms. Government looks like a V, had a peak in about 2009 and started really to slide in 2011 and is now at the bottom of the rank tied with media. And business looks like this. It rose, went down 2008 and has had a rebound. And business for the first time is the most trusted institution. It's a precarious perch, and we shouldn't expect business to keep that perch unless it partners with government. Be clear that people do not want business to overstate, overclaim, and overpromise. We cannot, as business, solve the climate problem. We can do a lot, but we have to work with government and with NGOs.
Well, that's a perfect segue for a question for Margaret. So I think probably most people in the room know that J.P. Morgan Chase has been a leader and example in terms of incorporating social responsibility into their corporate culture and also putting the dollars behind to show it. One example, the bank is committed to spend $500 million over the next 5 years funding efforts in major cities across America and also in Paris. So, Heather, my question for you is, let's talk about what it's like to leverage the resources of a large bank like J.P. Morgan Chase to drive policy change and make sustainable impact in a community.
First, thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of this terrific panel discussion. The policy center that I've headed up is really predicated on the notion that we have an incredible set of resources and assets throughout our business, through our philanthropic efforts, some of which you just mentioned, David, but also our lines of business, the data and research that we do. And we understand that to truly make impact at scale, we need to be a part of the policy conversation. We need to be partnering with government. And it's a relatively, I would say, unique focus that we have to say we're going to take the resources and influence that we have and we're going to be out there driving advocacy on issues of inclusive economic growth, separate and apart from what we do as part of our government relations capacity for the firm. And it really gives us an opportunity to say, based on our expertise, our talent, our resources, our investments, this is what we're seeing. Our responsibility is to help communities be stronger. We are only as strong as the communities we serve, and policy is a part of that. So it's incredible to be able to look at, for example, an investment we've made in youth skills. So we have a philanthropic investment called New Skills for Youth. It was a $75 million 5-year global program. It ended last year. Just today, our CEO, Jamie Dimon, is making an announcement about the beginning of the second effort of that. And a big part of it are the policy recommendations that we've seen based on that 5-year investment. And we're saying to states and at the national level, these are the critical elements to high quality career pathways. So not only do we think that $75 million investment was critically important and we're doubling down and going to the next phase, we want to see systemic change. And we believe that we have a tremendous platform to help drive that forward.
Yeah. Why don't we dive deeper into Chicago a little bit, because you have made a major investment in underserved neighborhoods and underserved populations in Chicago. Can we use that for a minute as a case study in terms of the work that you're doing? And, Richard kind of mentioned that, good corporate behavior also can swing back into a better perception of brands. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what you're doing in Chicago and any evidence that you have to show that the great work you're doing is flowing back to the company in a positive way.
So our Advancing Cities program, it was started in Detroit with a significant investment there. We're now in Chicago with a $53 million, including some investment capital commitment in the south and west sides of Chicago across the strategy we have, which is neighborhood revitalization, skills, financial health, and small business support. And so how does it benefit? Again, our principle is we are as strong as the communities we serve. If we're talking about Chicago and the presence we have here in our commitment, we are invested in revitalizing those communities. The work that we're doing is deep. It's working closely with community partners and identifying what we can bring in terms of investments, but also expertise to drive some of that change. And I think as it relates to policy, for example, I'll just pivot slightly from that investment to say, one of the key areas of focus for the firm, and when we launched the policy center that we announced, was reducing or eliminating barriers to employment for people with criminal backgrounds. 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. It's a significant barrier to employment. We are committed as a firm to address hiring ourselves, and we have a pilot program here in Chicago working with community organizations to diversify our hiring pool. It's been very successful so far, even though it's only been for a few months. And we're coupling that with our philanthropic investments and our policy advocacy. So we have a federal agenda, we have a state level agenda. I'm meeting with policymakers, our government relations team is meeting with policymakers, because we see that as a cross-cutting issue in Chicago, in Detroit, in Washington, D.C. region. that many, many people who are rehabilitated, who want to contribute to their families and their communities, are simply unable to do so because there are so many barriers in their paths. So it's the investment through an Advancing Cities piece of business, but it's also the other issues around it that we can bring our resources to bear on. And so we look at, from the policy perspective, it being another tool in our toolbox to help drive that inclusive growth.
So what you're doing clearly is done out of the heart. But I just want to swing back to my question. What's the flow back? Do you measure customer perceptions of your brand in Chicago? Are there any measurable results that feed into
the reason I didn't bite on your question as clearly as you wanted me to was because one of the reasons that I was attracted to JP Morgan in this role specifically, after having spent my entire career in government and NGOs, in the government trust data. It was really depressing for somebody who spent 25 years in government. But in any event, was because the commitment on corporate responsibility and the commitment of the firm's leadership to this work isn't about brand. Mm-hmm. It is really about strengthening communities here in the US and around the world. And yes, the benefits, I think, do accrue back in terms of our perception and so forth. We know from the launch of our Second Chance work that our employees, our customers, and people who might bank with us are more likely to because of that work. But fundamentally, that's not the reason or the motivation for it. It's a deeper leadership commitment to strengthening the places where we show up. And it's less about this is going to look good or can be part of a marketing campaign.
Thank you. So JP, and I know you do prefer to be called JP.
Go with JP.
I'm not becoming too friendly too quickly. One of the big takeaways that Richard referenced is this distrust and fear among employees towards their employer. And in fact, that 83% of the employees surveyed in the Trust Barometer do have a fear about losing their jobs. I know Barilla has done an intentional effort, been very intentional about assisting your employees and building that level of trust that is apparently absent in other countries and many companies in the US and abroad. So I'm wondering if you could tell me what specifically Barilla is doing in order to strengthen that trust level between yourself and the people that work for you.
Yes, sure. So you probably know Barilla by this blue box of dry pasta. We make dry pasta, we make pasta sauces, and we make bread and cookies, mainly in Europe, for 143 years. Okay, so this is the commitment to the same categories by three brothers, which is the fourth generation. They are called Barilla, so this is their name on the box or the name of the pack of cookies. And about 10 years ago, they had this vision of trying to formalize the way to do business. Okay, so how did we do business for the last 130 years, and how we want to move from there? And the mission that they found is that we will continue to make a food which is good for you and good for the planet. Okay, we are Italian, and so you probably know that the Mediterranean diet is extremely good for you. When you look at Greeks, when you look at Italian, when you are French, and they live longer, they have less chronic diseases, less obesity, and based on that, find our way to continue to build a food which is good for you, and by the way, is respectful for the planet, because most of these people eat a lot of grains, a lot of vegetables, and a lot of fruits. Okay, and since then, this is what we do, and we try to walk the talk. Walk the talk, investing in two things. One is the product, and continue to ensure this quality of product which made Barilla what it is today. And we will talk about innovation later, but at least as importantly, invest in your employees. And there we had some programs, some of them forced by the events, especially in the area of diversity and inclusion, but I guess that we will talk about it a little bit later.
Yeah, but talk about specifically what you're doing. How are you communicating and what are you doing specifically to build that trust with your employees?
Okay, so we invest, when it comes to innovation, we invested in the past years in products aiming at making pasta more relevant for a diverse type of people. I can mention ready pasta, which is a pasta that you cook in 30 seconds or 60 seconds in a microwave. Lots of people, millennials, or even older people who cannot boil a big pot of water and put dry pasta in it and carry it to drain it. So we worked on these solutions in terms of convenience and addressing specific needs of the population. Very recently, we came late, but we didn't want to come wrong. We came to the market with a legume pasta, which is made of chickpeas or red lentils, okay, which is addressing a very specific needs for plant-based proteins, so lean source of proteins, or people looking for lower glycemic index. So we continue to invest in the growth of the category, which is, I think, the best signal you can send your employees on your commitment on something, okay? When it comes to diversity and inclusion, I can mention just some facts. We've got, for the 6 years in a row, the perfect score at the Corporate Equality Index from HRC. We have now 12 ERGs around the globe. Some of them, by the way, partnering with you. I saw some people from HASE, so trying to bring in the workplace people from different, I would say, cultures, different heritage, as a way to connect better with our consumers. What can I say? 2020 is the first year after 5 years of hard work. I'm proud to announce that we will have the full gender pay equality in Barilla worldwide. And then we partner with the usual suspects that we can have, so the GLAD, the Catalyst, in order to continue to move to this journey. So this investment in people is important. Then we have the hard skills. I think that Richard's point was extremely valid. Investing in your workforce, so not to be outdated, okay? And we do a lot of work in relationship with the universities and suppliers there. We cannot do everything by ourselves, okay? It's a group effort. We need to partner with governments. We need to partner with universities, as it's extremely close to our heart.
Great. Thank you. I do want to send a reminder to those in attendance that please do submit questions on the app, because we will have time at the end to address them. So, JP, you kind of gave me a little bit, you were talking about gender pay equality, you gave me a little bit of an opening to talk about income disparity in general. And the Trust Barometer noted income inequality is one of the key factors that is eroding trust across the globe. I'm going to put each of you on the spot, including Richard, to address what your companies are doing in order within your own organizations to close the gap of income equality among your employees. And then second part of the question is, what do you think business needs as a whole in order to address this problem, which is clearly eroding trust in business and capitalism?
So I'm going to start by what I finished. We are a family-owned company, so we reinvest. The family decides to reinvest the profit of the business into what will build the business for the next generation. So I cannot comment so much what's going from the top to the bottom. Again, we had, as every company, I think, in Europe and in the US, we had gaps which were not justified by gender or by demographics as part of our diversity.
And that was a deliberate effort on the part of the company.
Absolutely, absolutely. The gap between the top and the bottom, and being French, I think that you've got it, even if I try to hide my accent. So I'm not Italian, I'm not American, I'm French. Okay, so excuse my French. The relationship on these matters are a little bit different in the US versus what they can be in Europe, especially in the south of Europe. The relationship with money in general is a little bit different, okay? Money takes probably more space in our conversations here in the US than it takes in Europe. But at the same time, and it's probably because most of the south of Europe was Catholic, and so we have these cultural differences. As money is bad, there are extremely strong tensions between employees and employers. And you probably saw some riots in Paris or in Rome about the pay inequality between the C-suite and the employers. So what we see here is exactly the same. So this distrust in big, this distrust because it's going too fast and technology has a risk to leave me aside is true, but the way to deal with it is probably different.
So JP Morgan pays its employees very generously. We have really nice benefits. We invest in retraining. We're looking at how jobs are going to change and how we can upskill or reskill our employees. And so I think from that perspective around inequality, we're very much committed to that for our employees. But beyond that, I think inequality is incredibly important. I think it drives a lot of how we want to engage as a company outside of just our employees. It's astonishing when you look at some of the statistics around the historic levels of income inequality and you start to put all these pieces together in terms of trust. The 26 richest people have as much wealth as the poorest 4 billion in the world. And in the US, the top 1% control 40% of the wealth, which is higher than any other industrialized country. So there's clearly a reason we're seeing these things. And I would say that the other finding from the barometer that I think is really resonant here is that more than half of people surveyed globally see capitalism in its current form doing more harm than good. And I think that in its current form is really important. And when you look at our CEO's leadership at the Business Roundtable and on the statement of the purpose of a corporation, it's acknowledgement that capitalism in its current form isn't working for everyone and that we need to be more full-throated about what that means and how we move forward. I think for JP Morgan and many other businesses, that statement isn't as much a revolution as an evolution. We've been doing this work, but it's important to say it and to continue to live out those obligations. So in terms of things that we're doing, it is part and parcel why I think our philanthropic investments are so impactful and why we look across our data and research for ways to promote different solutions. It's why we're involved in policy and advocacy. So I think the answer to the question isn't simple because it's for your own employees, but it's really what role can you play beyond that? And I do think acknowledging that inequality, acknowledging that there are challenges to capitalism in its current form is important for the business community to embrace.
Richard, I'm going to let you off the hook in terms of income equality.
No, I have really quick ones.
Yeah,
So the first is we've raised our minimum salary, so entry-level salary by 25%. The second is that we pay out 40% of our pre-tax every year to employees, and we every year include levels 1 to 3. In other words, the junior people get 2 weeks of pay, and that's I think 25% of the bonus pool, and that's important. And the third thing is we try and give them experiences. So the Edelman Foundation matches if they give time or money. We write a check and say, you're on a board now, so go. And so $5,000, here it is.
So I've got one more question before I go to participant questions, which is, We've been fortunate to be living in one of the longest economic expansions in American history. Along with that has been tremendous earnings growth with companies, the ability to fund efforts like some of JP Morgan Chase and many other companies, and the work that Barilla is doing and Edelman is doing. But what happens when the music stops? You know, there's no question at some point the economy will contract. Some people are expecting a recession. How sustainable is this when times get tough and shareholders still want a reasonable return on their investment? Who wants to take that one first?
I'll jump in there. I think for the vision of our corporate leadership is that if we hit economic headwinds, it's that much more important that we're investing in communities where we work. Our contributions become more essential, not something that we can necessarily argue that we're just sort of, you know, something we added on. It's critical. We fundamentally believe we're only as strong as the communities we serve and that we're invested in. And if we hit those headwinds, it's going to be really important that we figure a way to balance those priorities.
Mm-hmm. So David, I think that the marketing landscape is forever changed. I think that the millennial mindset of buying products from companies and brands who speak up for me is a long, not a short-term phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And therefore, smart brands will continue to keep the commitment to make change and make it tangible. I mean, I can't believe, but Unilever's Dove is actually lobbying for paternity leave for dads. It's a legislative campaign because they're trying to push Dove men products. That's something rather do, but pretty smart.
JP, any thoughts on?
Yes, in the CPG world, the music started to stop. I saw that many people in this room work for CPG companies, and what we see in the food business today is that the brands which are thriving are either small brands, okay, so because they created a sense of community. And so we have many examples of brands born here in Chicago, which are doing extremely well beyond Chicagoland, or the private labels, okay, because this is the name of the grocery store on the pack, and so for the consumer, it's an endorsement of good for me, or the purpose-driven brands, okay, and to the points that we were making before, brands investing in what's good for you, what's good for the planet, what's good for the community. Oops.
I lost my screen here, but there was one question that really popped out to me that I like, and Richard, I'm going to address this to you. Someone in the audience asked, what role does apologizing play in rebuilding trust?
I think it's the essential gate through which any smart brand or company passes in order to get the acceptance of a future state of better. Without it, you are sunk. And those companies that rely on the legal tenet of risk avoidance are making a devastating mistake. Mm-hmm. This is not to beat up lawyers, but it's to just say, don't insist that your CEOs take that path of doom. We've seen too many examples.
Great. Unfortunately, going to have to go back to my questions while we wait for the audience questions to come. Here we go. I prefer to use the audience questions, so thank you, Eva. Different generations of the workforce have different values, specifically baby boomers and millennials. How do you lead both generations? Is there a different way you build trust? And JP, I'm going to address this to you because you've been so intentional about it. Yeah. Briefly, can you say, do you take different approaches in terms of trust building with older employees versus younger employees?
The two key words I would use is keep the authenticity as a leader. So don't fake to be a millennial if you are not a millennial anymore. So be just you. Show your strengths. Show your vulnerability. And no matter it's a Gen X or millennial or Gen Z, she or will accept it. So that's the first keyword. And the second keyword is flexibility. You need to create an environment, an ecosystem in the company which will not be a one-size-fits-all in terms of work, flexible work arrangement, for instance. And so be ready, using the good side of technology to adapt your processes and your policies to cope with the different needs of these generations. But it could be also genders, it could be populations.
This was another question from the audience regarding what Richard referenced in the introduction, which is CEOs taking a more activist and vocal position on issues of importance to their constituencies. Heather, I'm going to ask you this because Jamie Dimon has been nothing short but extremely vocal on some issues. What have been the consequences of that, positive and negative?
Well, I think the consequences have been positive. I think to this issue of apologizing or admitting when there's a mistake and you have credibility and authenticity, being very genuine, I think that your survey highlighted issues that employees and others are looking to CEOs to lead on. But I think even beyond that, when a CEO is taking a stand about something he or she believes very strongly about, and it's viewed as authentic and genuine and impactful, I think you're not always going to please everybody, but I think the benefit, and that's certainly been our experience, is quite positive. And so I mentioned the second chance work that we've been doing, and it wasn't something when we announced it in October, when we rolled it out, and Jimmy rolled it out, our own firm, our policy, and our philanthropy, that we were sure people were going to embrace and think, why is a big bank talking about trying to hire more people with criminal backgrounds? But I think because of the seriousness with which we were approaching that issue and the genuine motivation to really strengthen communities and help people overcome their backgrounds, people who might have said that doesn't sound right for a bank to be taking that leadership role, we got a lot of feedback from people who are our clients, our customers, our own employees, that they really appreciated that type of leadership.
That was a great case study when it was a success. I'm not an NBA fan, but I think it was the general manager of the Houston Rockets, am I correct on the team?
Correct.
Who made critical comments about the Chinese government's behavior in Hong Kong. That did not go over so well. Richard, what are the risks and what are the circumstances that it can at times backfire?
So I think there are certain issues on which CEOs must speak up. They must speak up about diversity and inclusion, about sustainability, about things that matter to their employees. There are also issues of choice. Gun safety is one. And I think Doug McMillon did a great job at Walmart after the tragedy in El Paso of taking a month, listening, studying, contemplating, consulting, and then deciding no more automatic weapon ammunition in our stores. Big deal. A lot of blowback, but he actually ultimately did right. So I think CEOs have to go between the rocks. They have to decide, okay, I have to talk to my customers, I have to talk to my employees. I'm going to get criticism, but I have to be seen as acting and not ducking.
So, please.
I agree on everything. Talking is important. Acting is probably even more important. And so when I look at what we've done, even low profile and silently, because we are not the kind of company to be front runners in terms of talking, we are much more front runner in terms of doing. Vasa, which is a brand of our portfolio, which is the Swedish crisp bread, we became carbon neutral. We didn't tell it so much, but we became carbon neutral way before it became fashion. And now we are looking at how to regenerate, and not only eliminate, but regenerate what we as an industry, we have broken. We will remove added sugar from 100% of our sauces by the end of this year. We don't claim it. So I agree with Richard. Maybe we should play a more active role in claiming what we do, but what matters the most is really walking the talk.
But David, I do think United Airlines, Oscar Munoz, 5 years ago, made a decision that he was going to make a settlement with the labor unions. And he was going to pay them more, but he was going to expect more. And United's service records, et cetera, were terrible. And the merger with Continental was uncomfortable. And the Continental people still wore a little wristband saying, "I'm a Continental." Really? But 5 years later, they're challenging for the top spot in on times, and the people are happy. And so I think there's a real lesson here in the virtuous circle of pay better, expect more, get results.
Great. Well, I know we'd love to continue this conversation, but unfortunately, today's program needs to conclude. But I want to thank you, JP, Heather, and Richard for a very thoughtful discussion. And I know I've received some takeaways from today's conversation. I hope the rest of the audience has. So thank you very much, and thank you all for coming today.